please go watch Ironheart. I don't care what you're doing right now, you need to stop it and watch Ironheart. If you're looking for a review of this series, if you're on the toilet, if this came up in your autoplay at 4 a.m. and you're sound asleep, then you better get your ass out of bed and go watch Ironheart. I would much rather you give this genuinely great show a chance than sit here and listen to me yap about it. I promise you, you will get much more out of just watching this show itself. Most people probably don't even know that it's out, considering the ridiculous marketing that it got, if you can even call it marketing. So I'm doing all that I can to make sure you go and watch this show so that it gets a second season, because it exceeded even my highest expectations. Ironheart is a really interesting character-focused series about grief that expands the MCU in some really exciting ways. There are real stakes here that ground these otherworldly elements with real emotion and themes of trauma. Despite this show focusing on magic, it feels more street level than most Marvel projects because of how down to earth and small the scale is. It's very much so centered around the emotional character arcs everyone is going through as we see them deal with realistic problems. This series very much so feels like a back to basics kind of vibe as we see Riri get stripped down. No, not that. As we see Riri get stripped back to the bare minimum as she has no more resources from Wakanda or MIT, and now she's forced to fend for herself in a way that she's never had to before. And the overall conflict of the show isn't revolving around these cataclysmic universe-ending events. It's very much so a rivalry between two characters developing in a really natural way. The big threat and endgame of this series is to really just stop one guy from doing crime. It's exactly the kind of street level series that I've been wanting to see, and this delivers on that in a really fascinating way. And it's also a great utilization of the 6-episode event format that I know we're all tired of by now. Trust me, I let out the biggest sigh seeing that in the trailer, but they actually pace the show in a way that flows very naturally as we see things grow and evolve while Riri's life unravels around her, forcing the A and B plots to bleed into each other in a really exciting way that progresses the themes of the narrative and brings things to a very satisfying conclusion. And I absolutely love the focus on practicality in this show. You can really tell that they built a physical suit to reference on set, as it goes a long way to give the action and stakes a real sense of tangibility. When a suit of armor is noticeably fake, it takes you out of a scene very quickly, so I appreciate them going out of their way to give Dominique an actual set of armor to wear. It makes the transition between CGI and practical suit feel real, because she's actually wearing the armor. And considering that they shot this series all the way back at the tail end of 2022, they have had a hell of a lot of time to work on this in post-production, and you can tell. The CGI is absolutely flawless throughout the entire series. There was not a single moment where I didn't feel like Riri was actually in a suit of armor. This is what happens when you actually get time to work in post-production. The VFX artists can see their families, touch grass, feel the warmth of the sun for the first time in who knows how long, because they had years to perfect this. And in a day and age where literally everything is nanotech, even Thor's helmet for some reason, it is so unbelievably refreshing to return to our roots and see a physical Iron Man suit of armor, whether it's one that has to be put on piece by piece, or one that Riri has to step in and out of. There is something so much more exciting about that. I much prefer to see it used as an actual prop where it's sitting in the background and interacting with the environment than something where you just press a button and the suit appears. And also it allows us to get really cool shots like this where we see her flying into the scene and getting out of the suit. I did not realize just how much I missed that. I can't say enough good things though about Dominique Thorne in this series. She has such a great screen presence to her and really impressed me as Riri. I enjoyed her in Wakanda Forever, but getting to see a whole different side of her in this show adds a ton of depth to her character that she portrays so well. She radiates so much natural charisma on screen, but is also able to bring to life those emotional beats that caught me completely by surprise. This series takes a lot of shocking turns, and with a lesser actress, I don't think they would have landed nearly as well, but Dominique is able to bring that sympathetic side of the character to life as we fully explore her grief, and she sells the weight of that in a really authentic way. And for a character who is supposed to be one of the smartest in the MCU, I really love that they show you how smart she is outside of the suit in very crafty ways. Whether it be the actual saw trap she's put in to prove her intelligence to the Hood's crew, and seeing her outsmart actual geniuses by getting out of there in a way that they couldn't even prepare for, or putting her in a fight scene without the armor and seeing her have to use her surroundings to get out of a situation, it's very exciting and goes a long way to show you the subtlety of just how talented she is without beating you over the head with it. And she really needs that genius in this show because they put her up against a villain like the Hood, which is such an oddball pairing that I can't help but to love. Whoever came up with that idea, please give them a raise because it is such an inspired pitch to put magic versus technology. For someone as confident as Riri, going up against a supernatural force like the Hood completely shatters her worldview and has her questioning how to even fight something like that, which immediately creates such an interesting dynamic. She's constantly outclassed and backed into a corner and has to use her intelligence to escape the Hood, who, by the way, is such an interesting villain. The way he's portrayed as this twisted Robin Hood character with something simmering under the surface is fascinating to watch because he always keeps you guessing, constantly trying to figure out what his next move is and if he's truly as selfless as he wants you to seem. He's a really fun character to watch, especially when he spends half of his time in the show aura farming, which is incredibly impressive considering how goofy his fit looks at times, and I mean that in the most complimentary way. I'm glad they're not shying away of how silly it looks seeing a guy walk around in a hood. They never make fun of it or portray him as a joke. He's constantly shown to be this intimidating, incompetent crime boss, which adds a lot to his character and really makes him feel like a force to be reckoned with in Chicago. And I know this is gonna sound like a cliche, but the city of Chicago almost takes on a life in and of itself in this series. It feels like they're authentically portraying the city and all of its culture, from the White Castle locations they go to visit to the actual Chicago-style pizza everybody is eating. It's this slice of life that we haven't seen before in the MCU and goes a long way in making Ironheart stand out. Plus, the aesthetic is so pretty there. This is easily one of the best shot Marvel shows by a landslide. The colors are so vibrant on screen as scenes are being shot with dynamic angles and really interesting camera work. I can't say enough good things about the cinematography. They really nailed it here. And also has a really creative and unique visual style, whether it be the environmental title cards that I always looked forward to episode to episode, or little jokes in the environment like when Riri crash lands on this sign and the only remaining letters spell out ouch. It feels like they made an onomatopoeia effect from the comics in a practical way, which is exactly the kind of comic booky visuals that I think we need more of in the genre. And if all that didn't convince you to watch it, Eric Andre's in this show. Like, the Eric Andre of the Eric Andre show. The physical manifestation of chaos is in Ironheart, and it is just kind of surreal to see him in a Marvel project because I can't see him for anything but Eric Andre, but he is an absolute joy to watch in this show. So if for nothing else, just watch the show to see Eric Andre and then stick around for the genuinely great storytelling. I am so glad that this show exists and proved all the insufferable haters wrong. I swear, every single time, without failure, whenever people say, "Who asked for this?" Marvel delivers a banger. It happened with Iron Man, it happened with Guardians of the Galaxy, it happened with Agatha all along, and it happened again with Ironheart. They're able to take some really exciting creative risks with a lesser known character like Riri Williams, reinventing her from the comics and giving her this unique spin that turned her into one of the most interesting protagonists in the entire MCU. That elevated her from just another silly side character to an incredibly morally complex character that I am begging Marvel to give us more of. Not just because of how insane the cliffhanger was, but also because the creative team here clearly has such an inspired idea for what this show can be, and I want them to make it for as long as possible. It feels like we've only just got started with Riri, so I can't wait to see what our future holds. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything I can say without getting into spoilers, so please just do yourself a favor and go watch Ironheart. I would say it's the single biggest surprise to ever come out of Marvel Studios, as it went from a project that I was mildly interested in to a top 5 MCU series. And I am 100% serious when I say that. Just go watch Ironheart if you haven't seen it yet. And if you have, go rewatch it so we can get that second season, okay? I need to see more of this. That seems like enough stalling, right? People have probably clicked off by now. I hope so, because it's time to get into the spoilers for this series, and there is a lot to talk about. I want to start off by talking more about Riri's arc in depth, because I think she has such a fascinating growth over the course of this season, or should I say rejection of growth, because I think the way her character goes from point A to point B is incredibly compelling. When we pick up with Riri in this show, she's getting expelled from MIT for continuing her little side hustle in Wakanda Forever where people would pay her to do their homework. I guess it's not exactly ethical and considered plagiarism, but I say they just hate to see a young black woman succeed. But that little unethical business practice of hers was basically foreshadowing for the future she is about to go into, as Riri is now back to square one, without MIT's million-dollar laboratory at her disposal, and the suit she just spent her life developing is destroyed after she steals it, which is fair because she paid for it, but they once again didn't want to see her and her little Clippy knockoff thrive. It puts Riri in a really interesting position as someone who doesn't have the funds to continue this operation, but still has those dreams and aspirations to create a suit of armor and a technology that the world desperately needs right now. Especially when we learn the reason she wants to create this armor in the first place, when we find out that her stepdad and best friend were both victims of gun violence and she couldn't be there to protect them. And that survivor's guilt has always stuck with her to the point where she wants to put her genius to good use and create armor to prevent that from ever happening again. She has some genuinely noble intentions, but no way to execute them, and it pushes her down the path of being a criminal. She's forced to do bad things for the greater good to fund her suit. It's a really interesting moral dilemma to put this very confident character in, as she's now questioning herself and wondering if being part of this heist team is the right idea. It's not like she's hurting anyone and they're stealing from rich people who don't need the money, but it comes with that label of being a criminal. I think it's by far the most interesting thing they could have done with Riri's character, as they fully explore the idea of being a genius without funds, painting her as the antithesis to Tony Stark. We get to see just how far she's willing to go to bring her dreams to life and create a safer world at the cost of making the present day a little more unsafe, operating on this heist team of criminals who have killed people, and that's led by a guy being possessed by a demon. It sets up a great character arc for her, as she has to learn these lessons about being resourceful, and I think that they take that and subvert it in a really exciting way. But here's the thing, I have been incredibly positive about this series so far, but it's not without its faults. For as much as I do love the heist format those first few episodes take, I do think that one of the biggest weaknesses of the 6-episode event format is the fact that we just simply don't have enough time to flesh out the entire crew. Outside of Slug and Clown, I can't really tell you anyone else on that team's name. They're all there to serve a purpose in the narrative, but they don't actually get to become characters, if that makes any sense. Outside of a brief montage when Riri is meeting the team, we never get to dive more into what makes them tick and their motivations. It doesn't undercut how thrilling the heist scenes are, because I think they're still really tense and well structured, but when the heist story reaches its natural conclusion in the finale and we see the Hood turn against the team, I don't really feel much because I don't care for them. Clown only just starts now getting to show signs of complexity as she exposes Parker for killing Eric Andre, which is a war crime, but had that character not been Eric Andre, I don't really know if I would have cared about him. So while I do enjoy the overall heist format the series takes, because who doesn't love a good heist, I definitely think that trying to fit all of this into a 6-episode format means that you're gonna have to sacrifice some of these characters being interesting in order to prop up other ones, like our 4 main characters of Riri, Natalie, Parker, and Ezekiel. They absolutely shine in this series, but I think with another 1 or 2 episodes, we could have really gotten to know this heist crew, and it would have only enhanced the story that they're telling, which is pretty much par for the course for these 6-episode events. It's inherently way too short of a runtime for the story they're trying to tell. They still get to tell an incredibly nuanced and shocking story with Riri that is absolutely the highlight of the entire show. If I could just circle back around to that point I mentioned earlier. The heist story comes to this very natural conclusion where Riri understands that money isn't everything. When she's reached rock bottom with nowhere left to go, she can rely on her support system to comfort her and remind her that it's not money that makes her special, it's her intellect and her resourcefulness. And we get this really cool full circle moment where, at the start of the show, Riri confirms that she sold her stepdad's car, the same one from Wakanda Forever that Shuri rebuilt for her after it got destroyed. This incredibly sentimental item that she was willing to sell just so she can bring her dream to life. And thankfully her mom bought it back, because I love the full circle moment where Riri uses that same car and repurposes it into her new suit of armor. It's not only a way of showing just how crafty she really is, making this suit in a garage with some car scraps, but it also adds a lot of sentimental value to the armor, which I think is so much more impactful than just another suit design made out of regular old metal. This one has that emotional weight that comes with it, so that if it ever does get destroyed, it's gonna hurt a lot more. And while that new meaning behind the suit is incredibly sweet, my favorite thing about Riri's arc in this show is that they actually call her out for being the problem. She has people in her life directly telling her that she needs to grow and change and not let her grief define her, which is great messaging. But then the show does something really interesting and subverts my expectations in the most fascinating way in the finale. The entire season, Riri has been trying to answer the question, what defines a good person? Constantly wondering if she really is a criminal for all the things she's done, or if the ends justify the means. And in that finale, she makes her decision. She makes a very grief-stricken decision and decides that, yeah, the ends do justify the means. We watch Riri let her grief consume her in a moment that caught me completely by surprise when she makes a deal with the devil. And I'm so glad that Marvel wasn't afraid to make Riri a flawed character, because she is so exciting to watch. I love flawed characters, especially someone who is this morally infallible, but never in my life did I expect them to take such a radical shift with her character to make her this morally gray. Grief is the enemy of us all. It's a parasite that sucks away our happiness and feeds us lies. And it's a very real thing that is hard to deal with. Riri tries to make it seem like she has it all together, but her facade crumbles as the episodes go on until the point where she makes that decision out of weakness. She's beat down again and again and again, and she is really getting beat down this season until the point where she is at rock bottom. All the hope she's had in her life is stripped away, and because of that, she runs from her problems and makes the mistake of letting her grief define her. She's not the traditional MCU protagonist who comes to terms with their grief and becomes a better person because of it. It is a radical subversion that caught me completely by surprise and is the most interesting thing they could have done with her character. Riri feels like a real person here. She's too ambitious for her own good and weighed down by her own trauma to the point that she can't move past it. And it's not like Riri is a villain or anything. I want to get that idea out of here right away. I feel like there's a misconception that she just turned heel and is now a villain, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We're just seeing a hero who has lost their way in this tragedy, and I think that is what makes this show so impactful. The slow and gradual shift from this fun heist series to a show that explores grief and the effects of letting that grief define you is really powerful. Losing Natalie once was already hard enough on her, but the second time, it absolutely destroys her, feeling this sense of desperation as now she's directly responsible for Natalie going away for real this time. She built this AI coping mechanism, and now that it's gone, she has nothing, and because of that, she is manipulated and takes the easy way out. When Riri makes that deal, she stresses that only she would be the one paying the price for it. She was more than willing to put herself in harm's way because she thinks once again, it's all for the greater good. It's almost a kind of self-harm in a way, clearly struggling with her survivor's guilt as she inflicts the worst upon herself just because her friend isn't there anymore. Riri Williams is an incredibly imperfect character, and that's what makes her so captivating. It is so bold of Marvel to take a legacy hero like this and distort their perception in a way until they basically become the antagonist of their own show, seeing them reject the methods of being a traditional hero as she isn't strong enough to fight past her grief. It is such a bleak ending for the series, but it's also why I need them to make season 2 so we can watch her get that redemption arc. And on the topic of Natalie, I really like how she's used in this show. Not only does she have an electric dynamic with Riri, but her accidental creation and rebirth through AI forces her to face that trauma head on, immediately creating these cracks in her facade as she's thrust back into the 5 stages of grief all over again, and this time it has such a strong grasp on her that she can't move past it. The craziest thing about all this is that she was so close to getting to a healthy place by the end of this series. Natalie gave her this beautiful lesson about grief that when you forget all the memories that make you sad, you wind up forgetting the ones worth remembering, as you get consumed by these thoughts of loss and what could have been. Which opens the door up to a whole other host of questions about the ethics of bringing someone back from the dead, which I think makes this show incredibly fascinating. It's wild to think that Ironheart of all shows ended up being the most morally complex as they question morality and the ethics of AI. You have Riri using Natalie as this coping mechanism and someone that she can rely on. The show does a really good job of portraying the dangers of AI and how this misuse of it is doing Riri no favors in her journey to process this grief. Instead of being able to move on from Natalie's death, she's creating this unhealthy attachment to an artificial intelligence which is stopping her from processing those emotions and healing. It's why her crash out in the finale hits so hard, because she thought she had circumvented the grieving process, only for it to double down when it gets ripped away from her again, showing just how unhealthy it is to form these parasocial relationships with code, and questioning if she's disrespecting the memory of her dead friend in the process. And then you have her mom wanting Riri to use that technology to bring her stepdad back, which is a huge ask, especially considering that Riri did this by accident, but that sparks this debate on if it's right to reanimate someone, especially considering that this isn't their actual consciousness. This is just a recreation of what that person was like from someone else's memories. So it really depends on your perspective on if you like this, as we see with Natalie's brother, who is horrified at the thought of his sister being brought back to life like this, knowing that her memory is being puppeted around by this software and that she can never truly rest. To him, it is ghoulish. To Riri's mom, it's a second chance, and Riri is stuck in the middle as she tries to figure out if this is worth it or not. I was not prepared for this show to be asking those kinds of questions, but I think it's one of the strongest aspects of the entire series, as we get to see Riri go from a place of rejecting Natalie to using her as an unhealthy coping mechanism. And now to address the elephant in the room of the fact that Riri is a legacy character, and because of that, she is always going to be compared to her predecessor of Tony Stark. But the thing is, outside of of the fact that these two are geniuses who use suits of armor, they couldn't be more different. There are definitely parallels between their journeys, but it's them moving in opposite directions. Tony's story is about redemption after realizing the damage his weapons were causing, while Riri's motivations are almost the opposite of that. Riri was on the receiving end of that damage after she lost her stepfather and best friend to gun violence. She's trying to create a suit of armor to make sure that never happens to anyone else, while Tony was doing that to atone for his sins and become a shield rather than a sword. And I think that's what makes Riri such a successful legacy character, here even more so than the comics, because she could not be more different than Tony Stark, and it's clear that she's not trying to replace him. She is her own character who just happens to co-opt the suit of armor because, as she says in the first episode, people pay attention to someone flying around in a suit of armor. Nobody will notice her if she just does things the way you're supposed to. Co-opting the Iron Man legacy and using suits to get attention in order to make sure that this program actually succeeds is a really interesting take on legacy that we haven't seen before, and lets you know right out of the gate that Riri is her own character. I really appreciate them going out of their way to make these two characters as different as possible, even going as far as making Riri a magic user now, because it still keeps the themes of legacy alive, now just doing it in a much more exciting way, and they build off of that with the inclusion of Joe McGillicuddy, who turns out to be Ezekiel Stane. It is a huge reveal in the show that they do in the funniest way, where Riri drops Obadiah's ashes on the ground, which is incredibly morbid. And I also had that reveal spoiled to me months ago by Scoopers, which really pisses me off, but I still think that Ezekiel works really well as this mirrored reflection of legacy in the show. While Riri is running towards trying to co-opt the Iron Man legacy, Zeke is running away from it. He wants to avoid becoming his father at all costs, to the point where he's changed his name and lifestyle just to not go down that path or feel its temptations. The most dangerous thing in his life isn't weapons manufacturing, it's his annoying neighbor. And I cheered when he ripped up those flowers, alright? She deserved that. But he still has that itch to scratch as he does things in secret, using black mark tech in his basement to create weapons, and it's Riri coming into his life that kind of lights this fire beneath him. He's given so many different ideas for how he can use this technology for good that he's willing to step out in the world and create these things, even going as far as giving Riri a sample of bionic skin tech. And it's once again Riri at fault here, as her mistake is going to cause an innocent man to rot in prison. Zeke is framed for that heist, and he is thrown into prison right away, with the media basically doing a slander campaign because they still think that Obadiah was a great guy, and now he's the one staining the family legacy. Get it? Staining the legacy? It's whatever, man. Okay. But it's such a tragic arc for Zeke, because you can tell that he genuinely wanted to be Riri's partner and use these gifts for the greater good, but he's forced down that path he fought so hard to ignore, as he ends up in prison, and you can't live, laugh, love your way out of that kind of situation. It is hilarious though, just how many different live, laugh, love signs he actually had. It pushes him to this point of desperation where he has no choice but to work with the Hood, becoming the criminal he tried so hard to avoid. And if that wasn't enough, the writers wanted to make his tragedy hurt even more by having the Hood take control of his bionics and basically use him as a meat puppet to commit these crimes, dragging him down that path he tried so hard to avoid, making that tragedy hit even harder. But even when he's been given every single reason to become a supervillain, I absolutely love that he spares Riri. It's not like Obadiah in the first Iron Man, where he just snaps and immediately becomes a sociopathic monster. Zeke is a much more nuanced character. He's still not a murderer. He tries to give Riri a way out because he knows that she doesn't deserve to die just for screwing him over by accident. And it goes without saying, because he's easily one of the most underrated working actors today, but Alden Ehrenreich is so good in this show. I'm really glad that they left his future ambiguous, because I would love to see him become a recurring character in the MCU. There is a whole lot more nuance in this show than I expected, and I think it greatly benefits from it. And in the opposite direction of a character like Ezekiel is Parker Robbins, aka the Hood, the villain of this series, who ran face first into evil. He did not try at all to avoid this path. This is the guy who said that he's willing to do whatever it takes to become filthy, greasy rich, which is a crazy phrase. I think what's really cool about the Hood is that, like Riri, he puts on this facade. He wants everybody to think that he's this Robin Hood figure as he steals from the rich to give to the poor. But in reality, he's just as greedy as those billionaires he's stealing from. He's just a petty criminal who's mad that that money is in his pocket instead. And we see that rage and jealousy just boiling under the surface in every scene he's in. No matter how hard he tries to present as someone who has it all together and is this Zen guy meditating, you can tell that there's a few screws loose in his head, and that Hood is not helping with it, especially when we learn that this jealousy stems from the fact that his father didn't support him and didn't let him inherit that company, and now he's out there in the streets trying to prove him wrong and amass this fortune in his own corrupt ways, which is kind of like his own abstract take on legacy, tying him even more into the overall themes of the show. show. It makes him a really interesting villain because they don't try and paint him as this sympathetic figure. The more you learn about him, the more you see he is a desperate, egotistical criminal willing to do whatever it takes to get to the top. And it's in Anthony Ramos' performance that we get to see this really unique side of him, bringing that bitterness to the surface in every scene through looks and body language alone. And also, the way the Hood fights is so cool. There's one scene in episode 3, which I think is probably the standout of the entire series, where we see Parker taking down this room of guards. And I love that we see him do it entirely invisible because the choreography is all one-sided, but it feels like he's actually there in the room with them. The invisibility adds so much tension, never knowing where he's going to show up next, and then seeing body parts suddenly contort as he manipulates people into killing themselves and shooting their friends is horrific in a way that only the Hood could do. And the magic curving bullets are the icing on the cake that create some really dynamic fight scenes as they come out of nowhere and get some really sick kills. You gotta wonder if that kind of tech was used to kill JFK or something. But that probably came out of nowhere, but like the curving bullet, I'm just saying, do we know if Lee Harvey Oswald also made a deal with the devil? And I love the gradual transformation he has as we see the toll this Hood has on him until the point where he's a full-on demon in the final fight. He fits so neatly into this show that I would have never imagined him actually working in at all. It is a testament to how well the themes are established and explored in this show that you can have someone like the Hood fighting Ironheart and it doesn't feel out of place in the slightest. Alright, I've made you wait long enough. Let's finally talk about his arrival. After 4 very long, grueling years of theories, Marvel has finally answered our prayers as the devil himself, Mephisto, is finally here. We made it, y'all. Eric Voss can finally watch the sunrise on a grateful universe as Mephisto has made his presence known in the MCU. He is here in the flesh, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, and they used him perfectly in this show. Just please keep him as far away from Spider-Man as possible, okay? We cannot do one more day. It's kind of crazy to think that Mephisto's first appearance is in an Ironheart project, because if you told me that when this show was announced, I would have thought you were insane, but it just feels right to have him make his debut here, subverting the expectation of Dormammu with the reveal to end all reveals as he was pulling the strings the entire time and was the one who gave the Hood his signature hood. There was a lot of hype to live up to when the MCU did finally introduce Mephisto, but I think they lived up to it. I know some people are disappointed we didn't see his full devilish form outside of the one reflection in the spoon, but it doesn't really make sense for him to appear as the devil in this context when the only 2 times we see him, he's trying to manipulate people to accept these deals, and you wouldn't exactly accept a deal from a guy who looks like the devil, so I get it completely. I'm more so just happy with how well he's characterized as this intoxicatingly manipulative monster, telling people exactly what they want to hear with that silver tongue of his, to the point where it's almost impossible to resist making a deal with the literal devil. It is such a convincing performance as you really believe that this man is the devil and can make all your dreams come true for the small price of your soul. I'm sorry to say that I would probably just do the same thing they did. I am not your strongest soldier. And I love all the different tactics he makes to manipulate people, like how he shows Parker the control and power he has over others, while he tells Riri all the intelligent people in the past he's made deals with, showing that it's not all exclusively bad people who make these deals, giving her this twisted perspective that what she's doing is the right thing, despite all of us knowing that it absolutely is not. He has one of the best surprise appearances in the entire MCU, and I think that this show is so much better off with him in it. His what am I saying? His exciting arrival completely shakes the foundation this story was built on and makes it incredibly more interesting as we see these characters have to grasp with these decisions. And I think it is the ultimate payoff to the arc that was set up for Riri as we see the tragedy take place as she gives into her grief. It's more than just fan service or a cameo trying to get eyes on the show, as it pushes the narrative forward and takes the story in a really bold direction. It is the perfect utilization of a character like Mephisto, and I cannot wait to see what they do next with him and Riri now that she's made a deal with the actual devil. And looking towards the future, I really hope that it's bright for Riri Williams, because this show did such a great job of making me incredibly invested in this character, going from someone I thought was charming in Wakanda Forever to probably the most complex character in the entire MCU right now. If they don't greenlight season 2, I might just have to burn down Marvel Studios. They have the craziest layup of all time in front of them to continue this story and double down on giving unknown characters the spotlight, and it would be a huge shame if they walked away from it. It could be cool if they folded Riri into something like the Young Avengers or Champions, whatever they end up being called, considering that they're all probably going to age out of being Young Avengers, but I think that it would be really interesting to see her on a team dynamic and how they would all process the fact that she made a deal with the devil, which is still incredibly surreal to say out loud. But I don't think that that should be where the resolution is. I would love to see her on that team, but I don't think that a Champions project should be the next time we see her. I think that if you want to do this story properly, we need an Ironheart season 2. I'll even take a special presentation if you really can't give us an entire season, but I think that a second season with this same creative team would do this story justice and allow us to dive fully into the complexities of a character who is trying so hard to do good, but is caught up in justifying the ends by the means, that she has become unrecognizable to her former self. Seeing Riri make her way back to the light and redeeming herself would be a really beautiful story, and I feel like you kind of need to do that in another season, especially considering how much I want to see the rest of her supporting cast react to this decision, whether it be a now revived Natalie learning that she's only alive because Riri once again made a deal with the devil, or Ezekiel finding out just how much of a hypocrite Riri really is, or even now you could do a redemption arc with the Hood. The post-credit scene of this series sees him going to meet Zelma, who I can't believe I haven't mentioned her yet, is such a joy in this series. I would love if they spun that off into a Strange Academy show just to see more of her. But seeing the Hood go to meet Zelma and try and get that power back could see him act as this voice of reason for Riri, as someone who has been in that position and knows what it's like to have those voices whispering in your head trying to make you do these bad things. They were on parallel arcs at the start of this season, and I think that you have a really interesting opportunity to kind of reverse those arcs as we see Parker now go towards the good and Riri now go towards the light. Just don't abandon these characters, please. They have knocked it out of the park and surprised even the most devoted Marvel fans like myself, because I really thought this would just be a pretty good outing as we got to see more of Riri, but it genuinely became one of my favorite Marvel series. It's a shame that Marvel absolutely buried this show with the worst release model I've ever seen, because it turned out to be one of their best and something they should have been proud of. The discourse surrounding this show from racists and sexists and grifters was so exhausting, and I cannot tell you how happy I am that it proved them all wrong as one of the best in the MCU. I'm honestly shocked that they didn't stand on business here, because it is crazy how good this show is, and I think that with a lot of marketing, more people would have watched it, believe it or not, and we could have had this whole big conversation about how this show is one of the MCU's best, but instead it's going to go down as one of the oft-forgotten MCU projects that people are going to go like, oh, that happened? And then just move on with their day, when it's so much more than that, and it is a genuinely great show about how hard it is to move past grief and the things we're willing to do to make the world a better place. It's led by the incredibly talented and charismatic Dominique, who I would love to see as Riri Williams and as many projects as possible. She has completely won me over with this show and made me a fan for life, truly. There are so many fresh and exciting ideas as they pit technology up against magic, and we get to see the integration of that with techno magic introduced into the MCU, and probably my favorite suit of armor in the universe. We have a compelling villain in the Hood, the long-awaited debut of Mephisto, a solid group of supporting characters that really help drive the themes of the series home, all told in such a beautiful way with great cinematography. It's definitely the best looking MCU show outside of Loki. It has such a creative visual style that really makes it stand out from the rest of the universe. And if you can't tell by now by how much I've been glazing this show, I cannot recommend it enough. It should be required viewing for every Marvel fan. So once again, please, I am begging you, probably like 30 minutes later, go watch Ironheart. It's the only way we're gonna get a second season, and I need them to follow up after that insane ending, because you can't just have Riri make a deal with the devil and then not follow up on that. That would be an insane move on their part. But what did you think of Ironheart? I would genuinely love to hear what everyone has to say and continue the conversation down below. And while you're at it, you may as well give the video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you don't do it, I'm gonna make a deal with the devil just to screw you over, and neither of us want that. But I am fully prepared to sell my soul for this subscription.